This is a joint meeting tonight of the Park Cities Preston Hollow Leadership Forum, the Park Cities Republican Women's Club, and the Dallas Equal Forum. And we want to thank all those groups for participating in this and helping to sponsor this, which will be, we think, an outstanding program for you. We'll end at 8:30. We'll be out of the room by 9. That's the rules of the library. We like to obey the rules so we can continue to meet here. If you turn off or silence your cell phones, we appreciate that. There's no videoing except by permission, and it is actually being professionally videoed tonight, but other than that, we don't allow any videoing or recording of any kind except by prior approval. Bill Beasel is going to pray for us.
Before I pray, my sweet wife has asked me to tell y'all something. She is in North Carolina where she is visiting her 94-year-old mother, over returnage, and she fell this afternoon and broke her hip. Oh. So if y'all can remember Beth and her mother in prayer, she's very appreciative. So let's go to our sovereign God in prayer. Father God, we thank you for this great day. Father, we thank you for the privileges and for the freedoms you've given us. Thank you for the freedom to assemble and to discuss political affairs and political issues. Thank you for all the other freedoms that you've given us. Father, thank you for all the elected officials. You have commanded us to pray for them and to hold them up in prayer. And we do pray for our president. Father, we ask that you would give him wisdom, discernment, understanding, direction, and guidance. We pray for those that advise him, his chief of staff, his national security advisors, his cabinet ministers. We ask that you would give them all wisdom, including those that serve in our legislative branch and those that serve on the Supreme Court. We also pray for those in our state government, for our governor, for our lieutenant governor, and those that serve in the state and the House. And Father, for our own local elected leaders, thank you for Eric Johnson. We pray that you would direct and guide him as the new mayor. And thank you for the new city council person we have, David Wood. Father, we give you praise and thank you. Thank you for Debbie and for Sidney and their work. Thank you for this evening and their desire to impart knowledge and wisdom, and pray that we can use it to advance your glory. In the majestic and marvelous name of our Savior, Jesus Christ.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Bill. Sandy McDonough is going to lead us in the pledges. Start with the pledge of the United States flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the Texas pledge.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Sandy. At every meeting, we always read the 5 principles on which this organization, being the Park Cities Preston Hollow Leadership Forum, is founded, and I'll read those to you now. Spending money you don't have and have no hope of getting is a recipe for disaster. Thus, we believe in fiscal responsibility. More government and squandered spending is rarely the solution to a problem. Thus, we believe in limited government. Each individual must take primary responsibility for his own well-being and that of his family. Thus, we believe in personal responsibility. Every judge and prosecutor has a duty to apply the law as it's written and not as he or she wishes it could be. Thus, we believe in the rule of law. The people of a nation should determine for themselves the laws which will govern their lives. Thus, we believe in national sovereignty. We don't charge anything to attend here. It's a free forum. We do, however, offer you the distinct opportunity to receive our white boxes that we pass around. They have a slot in the top of them, and I'll leave it to you to determine what the slot's for. Seriously, it's strictly voluntary, but we do have some expenses. All we try to do is cover our expenses. Thank you for that. We always invite you to invite friends to attend, particularly younger friends, and I'm delighted to see some younger people here tonight. And whoever brought these fine young folks, we thank you for doing that. I hope you all will come back. We hope you enjoy the program. Are there any elected officials in the room? Bill?
Howdy y'all, my name is Bill Whitehill, and it's my honor and pleasure and distinction to serve you as a justice on the Texas 5th District Court of Appeals located here in Dallas, preserving and protecting the rule of law. I will be up for re-election in 2020 and look forward to visiting with each other a little bit more, and your support in that election. It's very important. We're dealing with some challenges, let's say, on the court today, and just appreciate it. Bill Whitehill.
Thank you, Bill.
Rafael Cruz, representing my son, Senator Ted Cruz. I appreciate your prayers for him.
Shelby?
Hello everyone, Shelby Whitson. I'm here on behalf of State Representative Morgan Meyer. Good to see you all tonight, and working tentatively with David and with Ben to set up something for July or August to have Representative Meyer and perhaps some other colleagues here to answer questions and give just kind of an overview and a preview of what's to come as we look forward to really this being a battleground for 2020. So thank you all for being here tonight. Looking forward to a good program.
Thank you, Shelby. Are there any other elected officials or representatives of elected officials? Are there any candidates for any office here? Has anybody thrown their hat in the ring since last month? Okay. Tonight we have an important announcement regarding the Park Cities Preston Hall Leadership Forum. As I've said many times, when you arrive, you found yourself at the Park Cities Preston Hall Leadership Forum, but tonight only for a few minutes, because we are rebranding the forum. We've come up with a new name and a new website, and we're introducing it tonight. Before I tell you what it is, I want to tell you that Beth Beasel has put in hours and hours and hours on this, as she does for every meeting. But in this rebranding effort, she just has outdone herself, and she's been helped by John Delanoy, who has done a lot of the website work and is a very bright young man. John, are you here? Is that, don't see him. John has just done a huge amount of work on it and has added an air of professionalism. And also we want to thank Bob Ferris, who has done a lot of our web work over the years and has been a real stalwart in our organization. The new name of the organization is the American Liberty Forum.
Yeah. Oh, like it.
And one of the reasons we did that was that everybody stumbled over our name and couldn't remember what it was. And I hope this is going to bring up the website. It may and it may not. I'm thinking not. The new website is AmericanLibertyForum.org, and you can go to it, and it has all kinds of information on it. It's got some information about who we are. It's got new information that's breaking. We've got ways to get involved. We've got educational materials. We've got videos, lots of things. And I would encourage you to go to it and scroll through it and investigate it and use some of that information. Beth also is going to have a blog on the website with her thoughts regularly advanced. And as you know, her thoughts are usually very significant and well thought out and knowledgeable. And I think you'll find it to be a valuable resource. I hope you'll find the whole website to be a valuable resource. But that's where we are. And I was just talking to Russ Ramsland a few minutes ago to see if he was going to be here. So we could recognize him as our founder. As you know, the Park Cities Preston Hall Leadership Forum was founded in 2009 by Russ. At the first meeting, I think he said they had 3 people. At the second meeting, they had 2 people. Naturally, it grew from there because there wasn't any place else to go but us. Russ, I'm sure you'll be terribly sorry to hear, is cruising the Caribbean tonight. So we'll all feel sorry for him, but he'll be at future meetings, and look forward to having him back with us. Anyway, we thank you for your time as we announce our new persona. I usually announce the next meeting at the end, but it usually gets lost, so I'm going to tell you now. The next meeting will be July the 9th, and it's Bill Ames who attends regularly. I don't see Bill tonight, but he attends here regularly, and is going to talk about the political and anti-patriotism indoctrination in K through 12, which I think will be a fascinating and informative event. And Phil Ritter, who is a trustee of the Dallas County Community College District, will be here also. So that'll be a good meeting on July the 9th. We'll look forward to seeing you there. We've drafted a statement about the American Liberty Forum, and it goes like this. American Liberty Forum is a conservative educational forum designed to raise awareness and help citizens learn about how to get involved with local, state, and federal politics. ALF, which is the abbreviation. You remember ALF? It was on television years ago. I've always liked ALF. ALF is open to the public, and there are no membership fees or costs to attend. An opportunity to make a voluntary contribution is offered. That's who we are. Now, tonight we have a special program for you, a really outstanding program. First off, we have Debbie Georgatos, who is going to interview our special guest, and of course Debbie is always a special guest. Debbie hosts a talk show, as most of you probably know, called America Can We Talk, which aired on Salem Radio for 4.5 years and then expanded in 2019 to a video podcast format where it now reaches regular listeners in 42 cities, 18 states, and 40 countries. The focus of America Can We Talk is to discuss the top issues of the day with the mission of inspiring listeners to be part of the effort to preserve the liberty on which America was founded. She's the author of Ladies Can We Talk, a book dedicated to inspiring women to embrace conservative values and to vote for limited constitutional government. Debbie is a former California litigation attorney where she represented businesses in employment-related disputes and a past Fox News Radio national political analyst. Please welcome, and she will introduce our special guest. Please welcome Debbie Georgatos.
Thank you. I don't know if this is on. I think the most challenging thing might be to attach the microphones correctly. Yeah. Okay. First, thanks very much for having me here. Thanks very much for having me here. I'm so glad to be here. We're going to get these happy things working in a moment. And I have the great privilege of introducing Sidney Powell. I've had Sidney on my show many times. She is a nationally known expert on the Justice Department, the FBI. Quickly, her background: she's was an assistant U.S. attorney, an appellate section chief, serving under 9 U.S. attorneys from both political parties. She's a past president of the American Academy of Appellate Lawyers and of the Bar Association of the Fifth Federal Circuit. After almost 10 years with the Department, try this again. That's okay. Ask my kids, I can be loud. Okay, so I will tell you. After almost 10 years with the Department of Justice, she went into private practice. She's been lead counsel in more than 500 federal appeals. She wrote and self-published a wonderful book, which is for sale in the back, called Licensed to Lie. It reads like a spy novel, but it's true. And it's about the inner workings of the Department of Justice and the many ways in which justice was not served in the Enron and other cases. She has overseen federal prosecutors, watched them actually, in some cases, breaking rules, making up crimes, hiding evidence, and sending innocent people to prison. You recognize her, I'm sure. She's frequently on Fox. She is interviewed in all the national media to discuss what is now, we're all watching in Washington, whatever gate term you want to use for it, FISA-gate, Spy-gate, Mueller-gate. She has become an expert nationally on all that's happening, what led up to it, and what ended up happening. And this past week there's been news about this. And so the point of tonight's interview is to hear the latest from Sidney Powell on how she sees this tremendous scandal in Washington, the Muellergate scandal, the Mueller report, and what it really means for America. So please help me welcome Sidney Powell. Okay.
Another seat down here for somebody.
That's fine. So first, I've been very grateful to have Sidney Powell join me on America Can We Talk many times. She is just a fount of knowledge. And so when we knew we were going to do this interview, I let her know it's the kind of thing when I talk about it on my show, and you probably all feel the same way. You could list 25 names, 25 incidents that you're kind of aware are somehow tied in. There are names you think, well, gosh, who is Azra Turk, as an example of a name that you hear, or George Papadopoulos, or Carter Page, or Rod Rosenstein. As this scandal has unfolded, there are more and more names, and it's very hard to keep track of it. And I think that that's a little bit a part of what happens. People on our side say, I'm just overwhelmed, I can't even follow it. So I decided to organize our interview tonight, I organized it into 4 topics. I'm going to tell you the topics. We're not going to go more than an hour, probably less than an hour, but there's so much to cover. And it's not just because it's interesting politically, it really impacts whether we hold on to the rule of law in our country or we abandon it. So the 4 topics I've decided to focus on are the origins of this investigation, the predicate case for surveillance, and all that means is the word you may have heard Attorney General Barr use this past week, the predicate. What was the reason this investigation ever got started into alleged Russia-Trump collusion? Third, the Mueller report, its defects and deceptions, and Mueller's statement last week. And last, what should accountability in the face of this corruption look like? So that's where we're going to launch off, and we're going to start. First of all, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, and for the kind introduction, too.
You're so welcome. So let me start with this. Even before the Russia-Trump collusion story emerged, former NSA Chief Admiral Mike Rogers became aware of a pattern. He was observing that there were many more inquiries being made into the secret NSA database, more than usual. And what this NSA database is just a database with information on everyone. And the head of that agency, the NSA chief, Mike Rogers, became so concerned about it that he made a report to, he went and talked to the FISA chief judge, Rosemary Collyer, essentially saying, something is really wrong here. There's far too many pings, information requests about people coming out into the NSA database. We need to understand what's happening here. So let me start with this. What is the NSA database supposed to be used for?
It's supposed to be used for national security and to find out, actually they can find out any information about anybody by querying the national database. It's really astounding. I mean, I could put in about Debbie Georgatos and find out everything she's ever looked at on her computer, every phone call she's ever made, every text message she's ever sent. I mean, the level of intrusion is beyond capacity to measure and imagine. It's supposed to be used only upon application to the FISA court for a FISA warrant or under very strict guidelines set by Congress. but the Obama administration completely weaponized it and politicized it. For example, Samantha Power unmasking, you've heard about Samantha Power unmasking like 300 people, and Admiral Rogers identified this massive spike in what's called about queries of the NSA database beginning in late 2015, and of course escalating through 2016. But in a decision by Judge Rosemary Collier, the chief judge of the FISA court, that came out and was heavily redacted but somewhat unredacted in 2017, she reveals that the abuses go back to 2012. And I think what we're going to find out is that, of course, the Obama administration, we know, weaponized the IRS and got over 1 million files of people sent over to DOJ on CDs for them to abuse the IRS database, and decided that wasn't particularly efficient. So then they switched to the NSA database, which has even more information on absolutely everyone. And Comey, while he was FBI director, gave illegal, unsupervised, unfettered access to the raw NSA database to 4 private contractors. The names of those contractors are still redacted in the FISA court decision, but that is on the list of things to be unredacted, and hopefully the American people can see who those contractors are. I speculated at one time that one might be Fusion GPS, but I've got reason to think now that I'm wrong about that. It's still possible that they were major contractors, and God only knows who they were leaking information to or selling it to or anything else. But it's just an unprecedented abuse of the NSA database.
I had one question with 7 subparts, but she got to all of them, which is great. But I do want to just in layman's terms say, just to be clear, this querying of the NSA database was occurring as a means of spying on political enemies,
yes,
first, and then second is a means of spying on people who, for all any of us knows, had done nothing wrong. These are truly just innocent people whose data has been collected by the NSA, and it was being tapped into by the Obama administration. I'm not saying him personally, but the Obama administration that was really using it, as a means of spying on enemies. Is all that accurate?
That's exactly accurate.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly what they were doing, and they were using it to target political opponents probably throughout the country.
Okay, the reason I brought this up, even though this actually preceded the Russian dossier and the launching of the Mueller investigation, was there was a perception by many, and I want to ask Sidney what she thinks about this, that once Mike Rogers went to the FISA court to let them know that the NSA database had been so misused by the Obama administration, and then it was not going to be as easy for them to do that, that those who are willing to engage in that kind of behavior had to go to some other means or method to continue the spying they wanted to do against their political enemies. Do you think that's accurate?
Yes, I think that's accurate too. John Carlin was head of the National Security Division of the Department of Justice during this time, and they actually rushed the Carter Page FISA application to the court for its approval 3 days or over the weekend before Judge Collier found out from Mike Rogers what was going on with the NSA. And then John Carlin suddenly resigned from the National Security Division of DOJ. But there may be still people there. In fact, I know one person is there that definitely should not be there and is looped into all of the problems. So hopefully that's one that Attorney General Barr can weed out. But apparently it's extremely difficult to fire government employees in any capacity, even those who should serve simply at the pleasure of the Attorney General, and particularly ones who have broken the law. You would think that would be pretty automatic, but it's not. That's one of the many things on the list of things to change, is to make it easier to fire government employees, if not put term limits on them, to avoid this heavily entrenched bureaucracy that we're suffering with now.
Whose job should it be in Washington to go after whoever it was everyone involved in this pinging of the NSA database? Is that a Department of Justice inquiry that should occur? So, I mean, nothing has yet occurred in terms of trying to find out an investigation into who was doing that and a potential prosecution. Is that right?
Well, I think there is an investigation going on into all that, both by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, Michael Horowitz, whose conclusions in the last report on the Hillary Clinton email investigation were substantially watered down within the Department of Justice. If you go to the actual report itself, it's actually damning in all the facts that it alleges and has scads of evidence for. It's not just alleged, it's very compelling. It reads better than most indictments. And that's where I learned and published an article about Anthony Weiner's laptop, which it turns out held 675,000 Clinton emails, all things Clinton, on the laptop of the pervert married to Huma Abedin. And, well, I don't know any other way to put it. I mean, that's...
I'm not arguing.
That's my polite description of Anthony Weiner. The article, the first article I wrote on it was when I'd only read part of it and my jaw dropped. I called it Clinton's huge wiener problem. I mean, you gotta have a sense of humor when you're dealing with all this stuff. And then the next one was about the golden emails, because that's what Comey called them. Supposedly the FBI was looking for all the BlackBerry backup emails. That's what Comey called the golden emails that they wanted to find that were so important. So then they get the Weiner laptop and they're told by the New York Police Department and FBI agents in New York that they've got the golden emails on the Weiner laptop. And what do? They go to DOJ and they get a search warrant for it that does not include the golden emails and does not include any emails sent to Huma Abedin, who everybody knew was a proxy for Hillary. So the whole line that Comey gave Congress about, oh, we reviewed all the emails, was a crock.
I'm going to turn now to talking about this question that Attorney General Barr raised in his testimony in the United States Senate last week, or in the U.S. House. It's either place, maybe both. He talked about the idea, Attorney General Barr said he does believe spying occurred. He's concerned that it was politically motivated. And he talked about, we're going to dig to the bottom of finding out what happened inside the FBI. His term, to be precise, is we want to find the predicate, the legal reason that the FBI launched its entire investigation alleging Trump-Russia collusion. By the way, collusion is not really a crime. Trump-Russia conspiracy to impact the 2016 election. And even I have talked about this case, I can't tell you how many times on my show. And even today, I'm trying to type out these questions, I have to go back and look things up. There's so much to it, but on the predicate, there's kind of two unrelated sources of information, or allegations at least, that the FBI apparently relied on in deciding they were justified in beginning a search or beginning investigation into whether there was Trump-Russia collusion impacting the 2016 election. Two different sources. Excuse me. One is the information that the FBI claimed it received related to George Papadopoulos. And you've all heard that good Greek name, George Papadopoulos. And this was a whole idea that George Papadopoulos, through some communication, had indicated that the Trump team had connections with the Russians. Second and separate source that allegedly caused the FBI to feel justified to start this investigation was the Russian dossier. So we got the Papadopoulos, etc., and we have the Russian dossier. I want to start with the Papadopoulos side of things, or Papadopoulos, I believe it's pronounced. So people have been saying that it appears that the FBI claimed that George Papadopoulos said things in meetings in London that ended up being passed along to some Australian. Basically, the point being, Papadopoulos, connected to the Trump team, apparently acknowledged having some knowledge about Hillary emails. Now the allegation is that the FBI set the whole Papadopoulos meeting up, meaning the FBI framed Trump by setting up the Papadopoulos thing. Tell us what you understand about that.
There's a character by the name of Joseph Mifsud, M-I-F-S-U-D, I think it is, out of Italy, that supposedly contacted Papadopoulos And I'm betting money that we're going to find out that Mr. Mifsud is the one who told him about, quote, dirt on Hillary, and then that got extracted from Papadopoulos by another FBI asset, Alexander Downer, in London. I mean, they were making runs on anybody related to Trump by multiple different means. Stephen Halper is a British, supposedly academic, who actually lives in this country but works out of Cambridge and London. He's been a CIA asset forever. They paid him well over $1 million in this time period. He's the one that helped make up the crap about General Flynn and the alleged affair with Svetlana Lakova. She just filed a lawsuit that starts out with the line that Stephen Halper is a rat. Yep, and then drops a footnote to the Nixon line about that. So it's a very colorful lawsuit that has an interesting timeline in it. If anybody wants to read that, it's available online. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the FBI ran Mifsud against Papadopoulos to begin with, or actually the CIA. I mean, this has Brennan and Clapper all over it in more ways than one, and Comey. The whole intelligence community was responsible for all of it. And then that created the information. They planted that with Papadopoulos, and then somebody else got it out of him in London. Alexander Downer is the guy from Australia that was involved, and just created it all. I mean, it was the whole thing. As soon as I saw it, it was run like a counterintelligence operation that we would run to try to bring down a foreign government. And they just did it to our own because it was Donald Trump, and he's not part of the Uni Party and not their chosen one. And then you were asking about the Steele dossier.
Well, I want to wait to get to that. I want to do something else in Papadopoulos.
Okay. All right.
Before we get to the famous Steele dossier, the other amazing story involving George Papadopoulos, the extent to which our own government went to set up one of our own people to take Trump down. The Papadopoulos thing.
Azra Turk.
Yeah, with the Azra Turk, and then he also, the suitcase full of money.
Oh, yeah.
The $10,000,
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have to, I mean, these are amazing stories. If you do or don't follow this is great stuff to understand the extent to which our government went to attack President Trump. Whichever one you want, both of them.
Okay. The FBI, CIA, whoever, tried to get Papadopoulos, tried to catch him with $10,000 cash coming back into the country that was paid to him by somebody in Malta or Cyprus, I believe, on a contract. I mean, it was perfectly lawful. What would have been unlawful would have been if he had come back in the country with it without declaring it, or it could be described as money laundering or anything like that. So amazingly, he had sense enough to give this $10,000 to a lawyer in Cyprus. And Andrew Weissman, the lead prosecutor for Mueller, who happens to be the lead villain in my book, which came out in 2014, orchestrated this whole thing. We've got Weissman's calendar now and shows him meeting, and maybe even he was in Cyprus at the time, I don't know, but his fingerprints are all over this operation to literally frame George Papadopoulos, because if they had caught him with that money coming into the country and they had agents waiting for him at the airport and searched his bags when he landed, they knew exactly what they were doing. That's the night they arrested him, when they really didn't have any basis to do so, but they'd already kind of blown their whole thing by having all the agents there to stop him and search his bags. They were just astonished that the $10,000 wasn't there. But they would have had a currency transaction violation, they would have had money laundering, they would have had FARA because they were trying to pin being a foreign agent on him. I think for Israel is what they were alleging. I mean, just preposterous mess. And thank goodness he had sense enough to know that something was up and left the money outside the country. But yeah, that's the extent to which they are willing to go to frame whoever they want to frame. And that would have put just a huge burden on him in terms of pleading guilty to something he didn't do, because he was totally set up, and he would have been looking at 50 years in prison with everything they could have piled on for that. It's absolutely appalling.
At the time these meetings were occurring that relate to George Papadopoulos, a lot of them were in the London area, and at that time, Gina Haspel, I think she was the station chief for the CIA in London. She's now the head of the CIA. How is she, if at all, implicated in this?
I wish I knew more about that. My inside sources tell me that she is a good egg and that she's working on cleaning up the CIA. I guess that remains to be seen. I can't really say. It's hard to imagine all that could have been going on in London without her knowing it, but then again, yeah, that could happen. There's a lot that happens with respect to the CIA that the people at the top don't know about. I mean, it's a mess.
Now on the Steele dossier, many of us read about that. It's the name Christopher Steele, who is the one who was hired by Fusion GPS to do alleged research on Trump's conduct in Russia, and Fusion GPS hired Christopher Steele. Fusion GPS, having been employed by Hillary Clinton, paid by Hillary Clinton, actually Perkins Coie doesn't know that the law firm is Hillary, Perkins, Fusion, Steele. So she's like 3 layers away from liability, but I hope we get her. Anyway, it was on the Steele dossier questions. Just to start with, the nation saw this dossier and had all sorts of kind of tantalizing and inappropriate conduct alleged. Are you aware of anything in the Steele dossier that has been verified, any material allegation in the dossier that's been verified?
No, there's nothing in the Steele dossier that's been verified. I call it smoke tied with baling wire. I mean, there isn't a single first-hand allegation of wrongdoing in the Steele dossier. In other words, a normal affidavit would say that so-and-so saw Debbie Georgatos put drugs in the trunk of her car and take it to the local stash house down the street, and that's why we get to search the local stash house down the street. There is not a single first-hand, personal knowledge-based allegation of wrongdoing against anyone in the Steele dossier. If we knew that Trump was a spy for Russia, it would still be insufficient to get a warrant to do anything with respect to President Trump. It's that bad. You could not get a search warrant for the crack house down the street based on allegations like that. And for the FISA court to have granted it, they went to 4 different judges. So the original application and then the successive applications were each granted by different judges. I think that's one of the problems that needs to be corrected with the FISA court. I also think we need some sort of entirely different standard for getting a FISA warrant against any American citizen. It's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which you would think meant it only applies to foreign intelligence and foreign citizens, not to American citizens, because it's a completely secret court. You cannot, even if you were brought in as an American citizen there, you can't tell anybody you were brought in, you can't have a lawyer, you can't do anything. It's a star chamber. And here, for this apparatus to be used against American citizens and then in a completely fabricated scenario is terrifying and just one of the most egregious abuses of law we've ever witnessed. So the Steele dossier, Mr. Steele, he's a real piece of work. He was being paid at the same time by the FBI, we still don't know exactly how much they paid him, by Fusion GPS, courtesy of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama through their contributions to a PAC and then to Perkins Coie law firm. Mark Elias was running the whole operation for Perkins Coie. And he was also being paid at the same time by Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. So here he is being paid by 3 different people to make all this crap up. And that's all it is. It is complete fabrication. And I wonder how much of it came from Nellie Orr, because we know that she was giving material on thumb drive to Bruce, her husband, who was number 4 at the Department of Justice, and he was running that over to the FBI. He was also consulting none other than Andrew Weissman on all this. Mr. Weissman was brought in to head the fraud section of the Department of Justice, which doesn't require confirmation, after Leslie Caldwell and Loretta Lynch came in. And he had also been Mueller's deputy director and general counsel of the FBI. Mueller has been protecting Mr. Weissman for more than 2 decades, at least 2 decades. And Weissman is just the dirtiest, most malevolent prosecutor I have ever seen or heard of in my lengthy career. Just the Arthur Anderson case, he made up the crime against Arthur Anderson, destroyed 85,000 jobs for nothing, reversed by the Supreme Court 9-0, then sent 4 Merrill Lynch executives to prison for up to a year on an indictment that didn't allege an offense, while they had yellow highlighted but hidden for 6 years the evidence that showed they were innocent. So they knew exactly what they were doing. Exactly. Yeah, the Steele dossier is smoke tied with baling wire.
I'm going to steal that expression from you. That's a great expression. But also on the dossier, it was allegedly used to get the FISA court to issue warrants to spy. And we've talked about this in the past on my show, but if you can just describe briefly, FISA courts do issue warrants that are justified. I mean, they have people present evidence, and there's a process you go through. And so part of what I understand, I'd love to have you fill it in or correct, but the agent trying to get this FISA warrant issued, you have to verify the facts that you have placed in evidence, what you're relying on to get the FISA court to issue the warrant. And it is reviewed at some level. It's not just any old FBI agent flings off a request for a warrant directly to the FISA court. It goes through levels within the FBI and the Department of Justice, and people have to sign off. So, I mean, I'm going to presumptively say, isn't the use of the dossier with its unverified allegations and preposterous, unproven things, it should never have been the basis for any FISA court to issue a warrant. But it also means many people inside the FBI and the Department of Justice had to have been complicit in permitting it. Is that right?
Totally. Yeah, in fact, unlike any other FISA warrant or investigation, this one was top down. Usually investigations are bottom up. They start in the field offices and develop and get bigger and bigger, and then work their way up through the approval process. This one originated at the top of the Department of Justice and at the top of the FBI, which is the only way they could do it and make it up and try to keep it secret. It's just absolutely remarkable. But yeah, that's what they did. They made the whole blooming thing up.
This is a quickie, but isn't this a federal statutory crime for the FBI to fail to inform the FISA judge of material concerns about the veracity of the dossier? And wasn't that part of their job, to let the judge know we're not at all sure of the contents of the dossier?
Yeah, well, if they'd done that, they wouldn't have gotten the warrant they wanted.
So,
they
wanted
weren't going to do that. I mean, you couldn't have told the truth in this case and gotten the FISA warrants 4 times. It's even more compelling because we now know that there was a letter from the British government that by protocol would have been sent to Susan Rice, who at the time was Obama's national security advisor. It was sent supposedly to General Flynn. It's now lost in the archives somewhere, but it's a document by the Brits specifically disavowing and destroying the credibility of Christopher Steele. And it was delivered in New York from the British Embassy on January 11th or 12th, I think, which would have foreclosed the last 2 FISA applications, the last 2 renewals, and happens to have been on the exact day that the first renewal was issued. So as soon as Susan Rice or anyone got that letter, all the FISA stuff should have been stopped. It also went to DOJ. So there are a lot of people who have their fingerprints on this. It went to OD&I, which is Clapper. Yeah.
You see the way you say his name, Clapper.
Yeah. Yep. So it got buried pretty quickly, I'm sure. But that's they're looking for it now. When you hear Mark Meadows talking about looking for a letter last week, that's the letter they're looking for. And they're pulling out all the stops to find it. I don't know why the president didn't get the copy from the Brits while he was over there. I was hoping for that, but it doesn't sound like that happened.
Maybe that's the secret they have between them.
Yeah, maybe so, but that letter exists. People saw it, people made notes about it. Even more importantly, people told the special counsel about it, but the special counsel didn't take notes when the person was telling him all about it. And so none of it wound up in the Mueller report. It would have completely invalidated the last 3 FISA applications, which meant that Mr. Mueller wouldn't have had access to a FISA information. And when you get a FISA warrant, you not only have access to, say, all of Debbie's everything, you have access to all of everybody who communicated with Debbie's everything, and then you have access to all of the people who communicated with those people everything. It's called the 2-hop rule. So you can cover thousands of people. They could have covered the entire Trump campaign with the Carter Page FISA application, even though Carter Page was not even a part of the campaign when they got the application against him. He had already left. I mean, I can't think of anything more concocted and twisted than this whole operation was. Broke every rule, every protocol, everything for DOJ and FBI from the beginning through the end of it.
This is one last question on we're on subject 2 about the predicate for the entire investigation, whether it was valid or not. There was a story, and then we're going to turn to what is in the Mueller report, the deceptions in the report, and also in his public statement. The last question is, there was a news story this week relating to the country of Italy and how at the time while this was occurring, Italy had a more friendly pro-Obama or friendly to Obama leftist government. And the story was talking about recently dismissing several intelligence officials who were still serving in the Italian government appointed by this friendly to Obama previous leader. And they're saying the story points to evidence they've been working to plant anti-Trump evidence with pro-Trump Italian-American businesses, but failed in their efforts. I mean, this is what I'm getting at. This is the Italian government getting in the middle of our election. And the question really is, what does America do about that? We have implications that there was Britain and MI6 and the Australians and the Turks, and now the Italians all involved at some level in this effort to undermine President Trump's candidacy and presidency. So are there remedies for us? What do we do about that?
That one's extremely hard to fix. I can't even imagine right now the protocols and things that would have to be put into place to try to address that, because we have no control over what foreign governments do. I mean, there can certainly be some sort of sanctions against them, and obviously the Italians have fired the people and Misfit was Italian. I think it all started in Italy with Misfit, and those guys that got fired were probably part of the Misfit part of the operation. But yeah, I mean, we've got this international community of spies that are willing to work together with the administration, whatever administration it is, to do whatever that administration wants to do without much accountability and no way for us to enforce really what they do. The really bad part about the Brits is we provided massive funding for their equivalent of the CIA. I always get the letters mixed up, but it's like GCHQ or something. That's their functional equivalent of the CIA, and we funded a chunk of that. So, I mean, we've just gotten screwed by all of it.
Now I want to turn to part 3 of our outline, which was the Mueller report, deceptions, and the Mueller statement. And I'm going to guess almost everyone in the room either watched it live or watched it later online, what Bob Mueller had to say last week in his announcement, when he announced he's leaving public life, and he also announced that he does not intend to testify in front of Congress, because my statement speaks for itself, says he. So to start with the Mueller report, now that people have had a chance to digest some of it. There's kind of part one that's about the allegation, the false allegation of Russia-Trump collusion, and volume two is about the obstruction allegations that Mueller assessed, at least with respect to President Trump and his team. But I want to go back to just the overall statement, and I mean the Mueller statement, the summary of his investigation. People have discovered within that report that there are just significant discrepancies of fact, or things he carved out or misrepresented, cherry-picked the way conversations were described, all to give a false impression of more liability or wrongdoing on the part of President Trump than is fair. Now, that's my statement. I'm curious. Have you read about that? What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, it's not the Mueller report, it's the Weissman report.
Okay.
I guarantee you Bob Mueller, who is in his mid to late 70s, I think now, did not review over 1 million documents or interview all the witnesses or any of the witnesses. In fact, all I heard was that he was a sphinx-like object sitting in the corner of the room on occasion. The last several months he checked out completely and was hardly to be seen. This was Andrew Weissman's operation. That's why Mueller brought him in, and/or Weissman brought Mueller in. I think it was sort of a mutual selection society. I would be willing to bet that Rosenstein was in on it, and also Comey and McCabe, and that I would also venture to guess that they talked about Bob Mueller being special counsel before Comey left. Certainly after he was fired, but probably before he left, there were conversations about needing a special counsel, and I can't imagine that Bob Mueller's name didn't come up, because who better to protect the FBI than the man who had headed it for 12 years, with an extra 2 of those years being under Mr. Obama, who asked for him to stay on for an extra 2 years. That had to be a bad sign, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, not what I would call a ringing endorsement of his stellar integrity. So, yeah, it's the Weissman report, and Weissman's textbook characteristics are piecing together parts of things that are unrelated, taking them out of context, hiding all the good evidence that would have favored the defendant or anybody else mentioned in the report that instead they wanted to smear. And I mean, that's his whole modus operandi. That's his specialty. That is his mark and trade. So yeah, it's the Weissman report. I wouldn't believe much of anything of it other than the conclusions. And they were simply forced to those because they had made up all they could, and it still wasn't enough.
Earlier this week, or I guess at the end of last week, Mark Meadows, who I think you're probably all familiar with, the Republican congressman who's been really outspoken throughout this whole investigation, Mark Meadows said that Bob Mueller knew the Russia collusion narrative was bogus within 60 days of his appointment as special counsel. So my question is, if he knew that at least of the collusion narrative, he knew that the dossier was bogus. Let me be more precise. The dossier was bogus. If he knew that, what was he supposed to do going forward? What would have been the right thing to do as a special prosecutor once he figured that out?
Well, for starters, I think Mr. Meadows is wrong about Mr. Mueller knowing it 60 days in. I think he knew it before he started, because Andrew Weissman was running the back channel with Bruce Orr and Christopher Steele's information between the Department of Justice and the FBI and Fusion GPS. He was in on all of it the whole time. Bruce Orr was briefing Andrew Weissman about everything. He was part of it. So yes, Mr. Mueller had to have known before they started that there was no there, as Peter Strzok said in his own text messages, well before the special counsel started up. So everybody knew it. Everybody that knew anything about it, everybody that has any culpability in it, knew that it was all made up before Mr. Mueller was named special counsel. It's disgusting.
Which the next segue to my next question. That's great. So what possible culpability does Bob Mueller have for continuing to conduct a fraudulent investigation he knows has no merit? Is he just completely protected by prosecutorial discretion, or is there some possibility he has culpability for what he continued to allow to happen?
Well, it would be really hard to prove that. Yeah, prosecutors in general enjoy sovereign immunity. A prosecutor can make up a crime against you, send you to prison for the rest of your life. You cannot sue them. That's one of the things we need to fix. We need to abolish absolute immunity for prosecutors. Our police officers work under qualified immunity when their very lives are threatened, and they have to make a judgment in an absolute instant with their adrenaline pumping through the roof. And prosecutors, like these guys, they deliberate, plot, plan, connive, and everything else, yet they enjoy absolute immunity. So that's on my list of things to fix. It's just an absolute must, but it's going to be hard to get that one through. There was something else I was going to say about that.
Return to the money.
Yeah. Oh, Mueller and the whole thing. Yeah. The reason they kept the investigation going for 2 years is to try to trigger an obstruction of justice act by the president.
Yes.
I'm convinced that's why they were so hard on his friends, Roger Stone and Mr. Manafort, and those things, literally trying to bait him into doing something that might constitute obstruction of justice. But the whole obstruction of justice section of the report is balderdash. You can tell that by going to page 9 of the second volume. I think it's the second paragraph, where they start by talking about, if I can get the words exactly right, potentially relevant obstruction statutes in an ordinary case. Yeah. That's what the whole second volume of the report is built on. Potentially relevant obstruction of justice statutes in an ordinary case. The whole notion of obstruction was firing James Comey and or saying, I hope you can take it easy on Mike Flynn, he's a good guy. The president has the absolute authority to fire James Comey. William Barr wrote a brilliant memo on that that's available online for anybody that wants to read it. There cannot be obstruction of justice by the President of the United States in firing someone that he's entitled to fire. Aside from the fact that everybody before then thought Comey should have been fired on both sides of the aisle, everybody was screaming for his head, and he should never have been FBI director, much less continue in the job. So there was, and he had the memo from Rosenstein recommending him being fired. The world is upside down. It's just all backwards. And I run out of words to describe how
You're doing great.
how absolutely bizarre it is. You know, the whole Alice in Wonderland, down the rabbit hole, up is down and down is up and black is white and all that mess. Yeah, it's just, I have another word for it, but I can't use it in polite context.
We're being recorded.
Yeah, and we're being recorded. They'd have to edit it out for blackmail purposes. Yeah.
Just one example, when people say that the Mueller report contained inaccuracies or things that were not, that may have been somehow incorrect, these are not things like misspelled someone's name or gave them the wrong title. These are things, just one very brief example, in the Mueller report, or the Weissman report rather, they describe a conversation, a phone call between White House counsel John Dowd and Michael Flynn's counsel, and they omit part of the conversation that makes it perfectly clear that the conversation was innocent and appropriate and above board. Well, you cut certain portions of sentences out, cut sentences short, you make a false impression. That's the level of actual dishonesty in the Mueller report. I don't want to go through all of them because it just gets redundant, but it's not a minor or a picayune accusation that the Mueller report was intended to mislead and to drive people against President Trump.
Yeah, they also said one of the key figures, Kilimnik, that was tied to Manafort had, quote, ties to Russia, when it turns out he was an operative for our State Department and had been working with them for decades. Just minor details like that. And I already know of one person inside the Department of Justice who is livid that everything he said was taken out of context and turned upside down.
So Mueller also announced in his statement that all of us watched that he does not want to testify, or he will not be testifying. He worded it in kind of a presumptive, you can't make me tone, but he just basically said everything I have to say is in the report. My question for you on both sides of the aisle, is there a good reason to subpoena him and require he testify before Congress?
I kind of have mixed feelings about it. I would really like to see him testify because, well, he'd have to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I don't think the Democrats have the cojones to call him to testify because I can only imagine the great questions that could be asked, like, Mr. Mueller, when did you realize there was no conspiracy to perpetrate the whole Russia thing? And you know, if he's going to answer that question honestly, he's going to shoot himself in the foot or some other body part, and it's not going to be pretty. I mean, that's the end of his career. And aside from that, how in the heck is he going to testify for hours with any credibility on Capitol Hill about a report he doesn't know what's in it? I mean, he did. There's no way he wrote that thing. I'd be surprised if he's read the whole thing. I mean, he would have to have a massive infusion of evidence and information for him to even begin to try to defend that report publicly. And I don't think he's up to it. I mean, he sure didn't look like it when he was doing his press conference. I mean, somebody described him as standing there like he had a gun to his head trying to say what Weissman had written for him to say and make the points they wanted to make to start the whole impeachment narrative over. And he's not going to hold up under cross-examination.
And the final topic we were going to go with tonight is accountability. Like now we could have gone in 1,000 other directions, but I want to talk a little bit about and ask Sidney to share with all of us, you know, the sense of what does accountability look like, and can we even expect to have it? Just want to start with some of the conduct engaged in by the Mueller team and orchestrating the execution of search warrants, for example. Many of us watched this pre-dawn raid on Paul Manafort and his wife. I think it was his wife who's outside in her nightgown, and then guns drawn to arrest him. This was to arrest Paul Manafort. It looked like I don't even know what a good word is, a KGB or a third world banana republic conduct. Did you think that the way that search warrant was executed on Paul Manafort was outside of bounds?
Textbook Andrew Weissman, prosecutorial terrorist tactics, anything to demean, degrade, destroy the other side, the defendant, and make it known that you own him. His life will never be the same. You're going to ruin him in every way, shape, or form. His wife wasn't trotted outside in her nightgown. She was literally searched in their bed by armed FBI agents who went in the door without knocking at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. There was no need for it whatsoever. He was producing documents. He was represented by counsel. He and Roger Stone both would have come down to the FBI office and they could have executed the search warrant at a reasonable hour. Again, I hold judges partially responsible. Some judge had to sign off on that and didn't have the chutzpah to say, no, you can't do this. There's no reason for it. It used to be that the FBI never ran raids like that on white-collar defendants or anybody that you knew was not a danger or a risk of flight. Those are tactics that are supposed to be reserved for drug dealers and people who might flush evidence down the toilet or, you know, something like that, but not regular, generally law-abiding citizens who have come within the scope of special counsel. It was a gross abuse of power. I know former FBI agents, including Buck Revell, that believe that also. It just should not happen. And that's another aspect of criminal justice reform that we need to put into place.
Similarly, also still speaking about Paul Manafort, he is one who has been prosecuted, and there are several different charges pending, or maybe he's been through one and some other, but the point of it is he was put in solitary confinement, which is normally reserved for people who are a danger to everybody else, you do this to foreign enemies, you're trying to get something out of them. What is your sense of the rightness or wrongness of Paul Manafort being put in solitary confinement?
Well, both the ACLU and the United Nations have decried solitary confinement as torture. It will drive a sane man insane within 24 hours. and now he's been shipped to Rikers Island to be put in solitary confinement because the New York state prosecutors have filed, I think, 16 counts against him. Mueller went after him in 2 different districts. He's already got enough of a prison sentence that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. And New York just piled on, and they just transferred him to Rikers Island. And there won't be anything left of Mr. Manafort that's recognizable. I don't know whether y'all remember what happened to Alan Stanford, the guy from, that had some kind of scam going in Antigua. But within 6 months of him being in prison, he was beaten to a pulp where he was completely unrecognizable and will never, ever recover. I've always felt I was tough on crime, but I believe if we take somebody's life and liberty away from them and confine them, we owe them at least the benefit of not being brutalized in the conditions of confinement. And what's happening to Manafort now is just, I can't imagine it. I can't imagine if it were somebody I had a personal relationship with. And it's hard enough when somebody is in prison, you don't know how they are, and even in our best federal prison systems, I wouldn't describe them as safe for anybody, which again is a huge problem. Bureau of Prisons is a cesspool of corruption. I have literally recommended to very powerful people that that the president pardon Bernie Kerik, who was our 9/11 police commissioner. If you want to read another good book, it's called From Jailer to Jailed. He literally was the police commissioner for New York and cleaned up Rikers Island before he was Giuliani's police commissioner and headed the police department of New York, where he was on 9/11. He wound up being targeted after he was Bush's nominee for Homeland Security. He had to pull his application, and 2 different U.S. attorneys' offices went after him. He ran out of money and couldn't put on the defense he needed, so he had to plead guilty. He got sentenced to 3 years in prison, including 3 months in a concrete box of solitary confinement, literally created for terrorists on the direct instructions of Eric Holder. Yeah, they tried to break him because they wanted him to testify against some other people that he didn't have evidence against, and he wouldn't do it. So they kept him in solitary for those 3 months. And he would make the perfect person to go in and turn Bureau of Prisons upside down and straighten that out. He's doing pretty well. Yeah, he is one tough hombre. Military background, fit as a fiddle, everything else. But yeah, Bernie used to be the guy they would send in to a prison riot alone to solve the problem. Yeah, but what he's been through is just criminal in its own way.
A shred of evidence to indicate he was violent, and with clear circumstantial evidence that Mueller's team had tipped off CNN to be at the scene to film it. They were there at an early morning raid. So again, please discuss the propriety or lack thereof of the way the Roger Stone search was executed.
The initials on the documents that I've seen tipping off CNN are none other than those of Andrew Weissman. I am sure that it was all staged for their benefit and that he alerted them ahead of time for maximum impact. They not only had, I think it was 27 agents, 19 vehicles, a helicopter, a boat, and frogmen in the canal out back to get Roger Stone. And this was during the government shutdown when Christopher Wray was on TV whining about insufficient government resources for the FBI agents to do their jobs. Give me a break. He would have had to have approved that. The FBI agents on Mueller's task force were still under the control and direction of the FBI. and the general counsel of the FBI. But then that's another problem, because the current general counsel of the FBI is none other than Dana Valente, the former head of the Eastern District of Virginia U.S. Attorney's Office, who was acting Attorney General when Sally Yates had to step down and signed one of the bogus FISA warrants. So, I mean, we're still rats on the ship.
Turning, this is still about the Mueller team, but we talked a moment ago about prosecutorial immunity. Prosecutors have immunity. You can't, is any of the conduct we've been talking about with respect to Roger Stone or Paul Manafort conduct authorized by and seen directed by the Mueller team, is all of that above, there is no liability for him or potential liability for him for that? No. She's shaking her head no. Okay, then there's no way, nowhere to go with that question. Okay, so I want to turn to how we look at the FBI and Department of Justice now. We hear a lot of commentators say, well, you know, clearly were some bad actors and some people have been fired, they've been demoted, they've left. But really, the rank and file and even the higher level within the FBI, it's filled with good people. These were just bad actors. So my question is, how pervasive is your concern? How pervasive is the problem within the FBI that this entire setup we've been describing tonight could have happened? And do we have a big problem with the FBI? We need a big clean out? Or what do we do to correct not just specific prosecutions of people who engage in criminal activity, but cleaning out the FBI? What's needed?
Well, we need a bigger clean out for sure. I would say it's at least 30% infected and infested, if not more than that. Frankly, I'd be suspect of anybody that Comey or McCabe promoted and put in any of the large field offices either, because they picked, and Mueller for that matter, Mueller and Comey and McCabe all picked a certain kind of person that they thought should be promoted within the FBI, and those are not the ones I think free people want in places of power. They're the Comey McCabe ilk who think they are the saviors and they know better than any of the rest of us, and the law doesn't apply to them. Just look at Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. The head counterintelligence agent for the FBI, just the fact he was having an affair, it's subjected him to blackmail, manipulation. If there's a Russian agent in the picture, it's probably Peter Strzok. He was more susceptible to being turned and twisted and played than anybody else in the whole scenario. And the FBI couldn't even tell that two of its own agents were having a major affair? I mean, how good is that for investigative bodies?
What about Christopher Wray? In fact, I think he was appointed by President Trump. He's the head of the FBI right now. Christopher Wray, he actually was can't find my notes fast enough. Was he a former supervisor of Weissman? Or he was related to Weissman, our friend?
Oh, God. Nobody asked me before they picked Christopher Wray. I wish somebody would ask me before they do these things. But anyway, Christopher Wray was at the Department of Justice when Andrew Weissman was at his worst on the Enron task force, running roughshod over the rights of everyone in Houston. Christopher Wray was, quote, his supervisor, end quote. Christopher Wray nominated him for the Attorney General's Award of Excellence after his stunning behavior on the Enron task force. And Christopher Wray is a good friend of Comey and Mueller. When they were at DOJ all at the same time, Christopher Wray asked them to please give him a heads up if they were going to bail out of the department, because he wanted to leave at the same time they were.
So he's got to go.
Yep.
Okay. I want to turn now to talk about former CIA Director John Brennan. His fingerprints, handprints seem to be all over this massive thing we've been talking about the whole evening. So what is your understanding of former CIA Director John Brennan's role in kicking off the Trump-Russia collusion, in orchestrating things? What has his role been?
Well, Well, Stroke was CIA and FBI. So Stroke was working for Brennan, doing a lot of what he was doing in all aspects of this, including going over to London, and we don't even know what all he did over there, but I'm guessing he coordinated everything with Halper and Downer, and I would bet he had a hand in the Misfit part of it too. Brennan's fingerprints are going to be all over it. The original, quote, electronic communication, or IC, whatever they call it, EC, one of those C's, was crafted by Peter Stroke at the direction of John Brennan. One time they told us that's what started this, that original thing, and they got to keep trying to come up with something else that started it, because there's nothing that's going to hold water.
Didn't John Brennan pass the dossier to Harry Reid? Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's
And it's
right.
in laundered form. I mean, John Brennan's been in the middle of all this. This is what I remember, and you probably all have that same impression when the story was first coming out. You thought you had a handle on it because you followed 3 facts or 10 names. But as this has unfolded, really since even before the election of 2016, more names, more players. That's what I was trying to get through tonight, is kind of the role of a bunch of different people. So which is what I'd like to turn to right now, is kind of your impression of various people involved in this. What was their accountability? Okay, I got too many papers in my hand. I must get to the correct page. But just accountability of certain people. I for sure wanted to mention John Brennan. What about Rod Rosenstein? What's your sense of his role, his culpability, wrongdoing, okay guy? Rod Rosenstein.
I'm not a Rosenstein fan. He wrote the memo to fire Comey and then immediately appointed Bob Mueller as special counsel. I have said publicly before that we're in this mess because Rod Rosenstein wasn't man enough to take care of it. I'm assuming the only reason he stayed at Department of Justice was because he realized his career was going to be over if he did not cooperate with the Inspector General. So I am optimistic, at least for now, that he will have cooperated extensively with the Inspector General. I can't imagine, he testified in front of Congress that he was only briefed on the FISA application. Here you are sitting there with an application to spy in the most intrusive way on a fellow American citizen, sign your name to a document like that and don't even read it. I would have fired him for that alone. That should never happen. And so far, everybody who's talked about the FISA applications, nobody's admitted writing it yet. I mean, who wrote the bloomin' thing? We've got people who signed off on it and swore that it was verified at multiple levels, which we know was not true. Comey's admitted not a word of it was ever verified, even though he signed it, and in big block letters at the top it says verified. That's fraud on the court. That's obstruction of justice right there by Mr. Comey. But their verification process seems to be nothing more than you put the Steele dossier in the file and that's the verification for it. Another thing that needs to change in the FISA law, if we don't abolish the whole bloomin' system as having any application to any American citizen.
Actually, should we get rid of the FISA court for a while? Should we massively reduce its power, or should Congress define its power in a more narrow way?
Yeah, I really think we should do something very different with the FISA court. I don't think any American citizen should be hauled into the FISA court, at least certainly not a natural-born American citizen without representation by counsel. I can't imagine how you deal with something like that. It's a star chamber. It's a star chamber. And obviously the verification procedures need to be substantially beefed up. If they can't independently corroborate the major allegations in an application, it shouldn't stand. A regular search warrant wouldn't. Even if you have an informant, a reliable informant in a drug case, and you know everybody involved is dealing drugs, you still have to have practically pictures or first-hand statements by other people that corroborate that evidence. They had none of that in these applications. They were totally fabricated.
How about Andrew McCabe?
Oh. The list of crimes goes on and on. I mean, there are 3 counts that should be teed up against him right now on the basis of the Inspector General's report, and yet he's out running around doing book tours and making hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't know why that is, other than perhaps the U.S. Attorney in D.C. has not done her job. She's also the one that let the Awan brother, the Pakistani brother that was running the multi-million-dollar scam on Congress, blackmailing congressmen, had Debbie Wasserman Schultz's password and that of 40 other congressmen in the Democratic Party on his thumb drive, and making out with massive amounts of information that was leaving the country. And he also, of course, since she worked for the DNC, would have had access to all of that. And then the Mueller report wants to conclude that it appears that Russia hacked the DNC computer when there's evidence that the download speed was too fast to be transmitted electronically. It had to be done inside. And Mr. Awan has all that information. I mean, why didn't somebody look there? And of course, they can't say that Russia did hack it because the DNC didn't allow, how does that happen, the FBI to search their computer. Try that the next time the FBI wants to run a search warrant on your house. I'm sorry, I'm not going to allow you to come in and search my computer. Just think of me as the DNC. Yeah. That's not going to work, but it worked for the DNC. So there's no way anybody could ever say that they can't prove the Russians hacked that computer. So Mueller's conclusions, even in volume 1 of his report, has to be that it appears that it was hacked by the Russians. Balderdash.
I have a few more names. I am curious your reaction. James Baker.
James Baker was the general counsel of the FBI, who also signed off on the fraudulent FISA applications. I think he's in trouble. There are other allegations that may fall against him too.
Bruce Orr.
Yeah, Bruce Orr is the number 4 guy at the Department of Justice who's been demoted twice from number 4 position down to, he's way down there now. He may be working out of a broom closet by now, I'm not sure. But I think he's also cooperating with the Inspector General. That's the only reason I can think he would still be there. His wife was Nellie Orr. She was working at Fusion GPS and crafting a large part of the Steele dossier. I'm still betting Nellie wrote more of it than Christopher Steele did. She was also CIA. She was a Brennan person, staffed with Fusion GPS to make it all up.
The last 2 are the killer names. How about Hillary Clinton? Is there any possibility, serious, any possibility this touches her?
Yeah. I think there are some possibilities. I mean, between the Clinton Foundation crimes and the Uranium One stuff, I mean, I think Barr is looking back into a lot of things. And if anybody were ripe for prosecution for creating multiple crimes, I've got an article in the New York Observer from 3 years ago that got a Drudge hit called "The Countless Crimes of Hillary Clinton." You can't begin to count them. So maybe, I mean, that would certainly be I don't wish prison on anybody. I mean, even when I was a federal prosecutor, it literally made me sick to go to sentencing. I mean, obviously there's some people that have to go to prison, but the crimes she committed are absolutely intolerable, and for her to get away with it spits in the face of the rule of law completely. We don't have a rule of law unless it also applies to Hillary Clinton.
Last character I want to ask about is the former President Barack Obama. Any possibility any of this touches him?
Well, I have no doubt that the trail leads there, but whether there's going to be enough evidence to prove it or not is another question. We know that the sit room was handled differently, that video feeds were cut to it for small meetings related to all of this. Of course, you've got Susan Rice's unmaskings. We've got the letter from the Brits that would have gone to Susan Rice as part of the protocol. And we got Peter Strzok's text messages talking about how POTUS wanted to see everything. I think there's more than one of those. There's a fairly significant body of evidence just in the public domain that he knew exactly what was going on. One of the reasons I think the FBI had to cover up the entire Hillary server mess was because Barack Obama was emailing her on that server under an alias. He had to have whitelisted her information and email address on his BlackBerry, or had the tech guys at the White House do it for her emails to come through to him from that address. So yeah, he knew exactly what was going on, and talk about lying to the American people in the press. You know, he said, "Oh, I didn't know anything about it till I heard about it in the press." Yeah, right, Mr. Alias. Yeah. And how many other hundreds of high-ranking people were emailing her knowing exactly that Clinton.com is not state.gov and would not be secure? I would think that would include Robert Mueller, who was director of the FBI at the time, and may have even taken the sample of uranium over to Putin on his FBI jet. I would think it would also include the Attorney General at the time, and the head of the CIA at the time, and all kinds of other high-ranking people in and out of Congress and the government. A bunch of people knew that. It's got to be at least 100 people wide and deep. I mean, think about it. If somebody had done their job there, we could have cleaned out DC and started over, which is kind of what we need to do.
I have one last question, then we're going to go to your questions, and I think I might even carry the microphone around, but anyway, my one last question up here is, there's a term being used called lawfare, and it is the idea that, I mean, it's used actually in many contexts, but it's use of law to, it weaponizes the law against someone you want to weaponize against. The particular context here is that it appears that Nancy Pelosi has changed some of the procedures, rules within the U.S. House to grease the skids, to permit the impeachment process to move forward more quickly. Not just impeachment, but the ability to execute subpoenas and search warrants without, not search warrants, subpoenas against witnesses and investigations. She's making it easier for the Democrats to do this. It's a lead up to the apparent effort to impeach the president. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, Pelosi has staffed up her side of Congress with some major lawyers who are very expert in lawfare, and it looks like they're following the impeachment plan that they've had going for at least 2 years to the letter, and weaponizing the law and Congress essentially to act as their own counter DOJ, and they're planning to file civil suits against people like Attorney General Barr and Don McGahn and others, pursuant to which they'll seek a court order for them to pay $25,000 a day in fines for contempt of Congress. That's where all that mess is going, and totally contrary to the Department of Justice, which is supposed to be the only prosecutorial arm of our government. They're kind of creating an Uber Department of Justice or counter Department of Justice now
in
Congress
yeah.
with our tax dollars to harass our elected officials that are trying to clean up the swamp.
And that, on that upbeat note, please help me thank Sidney Powell for this fabulous interview. And we do want to take questions. One thing I forgot to say, one thing I forgot to mention is, or maybe I did, but she has her book for sale in the back. License to Lie is a great book. It is timeless. Second point is she's in the middle of writing a new book, and I think I forgot to mention that. So would you just tell them what the book is that you're now working on?
Yep. It's called Conviction Machine. My co-author is Harvey Silverglate, who wrote 3 Felonies a Day. He suggested that we do this, and its subtitle is Standing Up to Prosecutorial Abuse. We're hoping to propose solutions for criminal justice reform, some of which you heard in short form tonight. because we really want to encourage Congress and everyone to start thinking in terms of narrowing down the complete discretion that prosecutors hold to ruin lives. I mean, there's literally, their discretion is unbounded. 40 years ago, that was okay. We didn't have as many crimes, and prosecutors thought about things differently. They believed the mantra that we were supposed to seek justice, not convictions. But in the last 20 years, lawfare is what has emerged, and people are being targeted for political reasons.
I'm sure it'll be another must read. Why don't we just raise your hand if you have a question? I'm happy to bring you around.
I don't know how far this, oh, yeah,
Debbie.
we'll do this, yes.
Record probably will get there. Why don't you just repeat the question?
Okay, I'm sorry,
I don't
I'm
think
tangled here.
So it's stuck on the chair.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, now that you said, the cord's not gonna reach her?
I don't think so. Just
Okay, fine,
just
be that way,
repeat
David.
question.
Okay. Oh, actually, I think she's going to go, then you can go next. How about that?
With the corruption in the Justice Department and the swamp still in how effective
With the corruption embedded in the FBI, how effective will William Barr be?
And the Justice Department, I think he can be very effective. Holding the high-ranking people accountable, if they get indictments against the most serious offenders, that will make a huge difference. They also need to fire some people and just let the civil division litigate it. That's what the civil division's there for, to litigate suits against the government. And then we also need to, we must get back control of Congress, and then get legislation passed that curbs and puts in place limits of time limits on civil servants, enables their automatic firing for lack of candor in any form or any other commission of any sort of crime, pornography. I mean, you name it, there's ought to be, I mean, they're supposed to be public servants, for Pete's sake. You know, we've lost the concept of public service completely. And on top of that, they have this entitlement to their jobs, which should never exist for anybody anywhere. If they're not doing their jobs, they should be fired, like anybody else.
What do you think the chance is that there will actually be effective prosecution, indictments and prosecutions in the reasonable timeline?
I think there's a good chance there are going to be some indictments and effective prosecutions within the next 18 months. I mean, I've heard to expect some indictments within the next few months. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Do you think now that all the participants are rolling over on each other, that there's a good chance that Mueller, who's been exposed, will roll over on Weissman, stating that he was the one who actually wrote the report so that he can get out of his position and roll over on Weissman?
I doubt it. I think they're almost like father and son. Yeah.
This is,
Yeah, that's the NSA database.
So
Yep.
are any of us safe from any federal abuse?
Nope, you're not.
So what do we do?
Yeah.
Arm ourselves?
They can spy on anything you're doing anytime.
They also said we've all committed at least 10 federal crimes and we don't even know it.
Well, that's the premise of Harvey Silverglate's book, 3 Felonies a Day, that the average American citizen commits 3 felonies every day going about their lawful business, because there's so many crimes out there that you do something wrong and you don't even know it. I mean, if you've ever applied for a bank loan, for example, and taken some of the money and that was left over or whatever and used it for something else, but you said on the loan you were going to buy a car or remodel your house or whatever, according to Mr. Weissman, you've committed bank fraud. You could be prosecuted for that. False statement on a bank form.
Will you be writing a book about the deep state?
Please.
Yeah, if I have time, it's going to be a while though. Yeah, yeah, it's really deep. Yeah.
So how has all this gotten exposed? Because we know there's no true investigative reporting anymore. So did they meet, like CNN really knows a lot of this is fraud and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, they know. They're part of it. I mean, one of the things we need to find out is who was paid by Fusion GPS to push all the media stuff. I'm pretty sure Isikoff was, and David Korn, and maybe David Ignatius at the New York Times, at the Washington Post. I don't know who all was paid, but I know a lot of them were. And then Dianne Feinstein's former chief of staff, Doug Jones, started a group called Penn Quarter within a few days after the election that immediately raised $50 million to continue the, quote, Russia collusion narrative after the election. Who got paid all that money and to do what? And one of the good things about Barr's letter to Congress is it seems like they're looking into the non-government entities' conduct too. And one of them ought to be Penn Quarter, and one should definitely be Fusion GPS.
What about Adam Schiff?
Oh, God.
What about him?
Yeah. Yeah.
Bad guy.
Just
What about
shift for brains.
Okay. Okay. What about the prosecutor, the U.S. attorney now, who is working under Barr, John Durham?
John Durham.
Yeah. What do you know about him?
I don't know John Durham personally, the U.S. attorney in Connecticut who's running the new and big investigation, but he has certainly put FBI agents in prison. And he has also freed people that Mr. Mueller put in prison that had committed no crime.
This is
So
good.
I would say he's got a pretty good perspective on what might need to be done here, and he seems respected by both parties, at least he will have been until he does the right thing here.
There's a bunch. This lady, and then she had her hand up. I know. You want to go ahead?
Me, thank you. I'm thinking ahead here in terms of this impeachment investigation. If they're going to do all of this, aren't they're going to discover things that they're going to use against anybody and everybody they can. And in this process, whether, I guess the other question I should ask is, do you think they will be successful in impeachment?
I don't think they'll be successful in impeachment. Well, I guess they could return articles of impeachment. They probably can get enough votes to do that, but obviously he's not going to be convicted in the Senate. So it would be another just, major publicity campaign to try to keep everything stirred up and him under a cloud as long as they can possibly do that, which is why they started the whole thing anyway.
Well, what they're really trying to do is not win the next election. They want to win the 2016 election. So right now, where they're at with all this investigation, it's any little piece of paper that anybody has anywhere over the last 30 or 40 years. How can they spend that kind of time and money and put the American people through this?
Because it's all about them. It's all about their power. It's all about them. They're some of the sickest people I've ever seen. And I didn't used to be political. I've never paid any attention to politics. But what I've seen in the last 10 years is mind-blowing.
Yeah, we got to
Yeah, who? The older lady back there? Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything that can be done to have
Contribute to his defense fund. They have a defense fund going that definitely needs contributions. But
what about any recompense to the people who've been ruined by this, like General Flynn and Papadopoulos and all the rest of them?
General Flynn has a defense fund too that needs funding. If anybody knows anybody that can help with either of those defense funds, small contributions or large, it all makes a difference.
Does Valerie Jarrett have anything to do with it?
Oh yeah. She lives in Obama's house in Kalorama in D.C., and they're running roughly $2 million a day through the basement operations center of his OFA organization. My theory is he's the one writing all the talking points and crisis du week that comes out. How every week there's a new crisis, and all of a sudden now all the Democratic operatives are using the exact same language to describe everything. I think that's where it's coming from.
And Obama said he was going to leave after his daughters got out of high school.
Yeah, right. Yep. He also said you can keep your doctor.
Wow, this is like, I don't know if I more depressed than when I watched the
We have Bill Barr. I mean, I've nicknamed him Hercules because God knows he's got to clean out the Augean stables.
President Trump every day amazes me. But, talking about Nancy Pelosi, because I'm originally, don't hate me, I'm from California, San Francisco, and I came here.
She's from California, but don't hate her. She came here as fast as she could.
I'm more conservative than anybody in this room because I lived under the policies that are effective. It's communism is what it is in California.
Yeah.
But what I'm just hearing you, and it's kind of like there's always checks and balances, and there's limit of power, and it sounds like Nancy Pelosi is able to set up this department or these lawyers that can go and sue. There's no limit on her power. There isn't any that there can be countersuits against her doing that. I mean, it just seems like all of a sudden she's got all the power. I mean, we voted for President Trump, who's supposed to be president.
Right.
And she is now doing it. So is there any limit, anything that can be done to say, wait a second, you don't have that authority? Because it just seems like she's just doing whatever she wants.
Yeah, well,
It's pretty scary.
yeah, she's number 3 in our government.
I know,
Yeah.
it keeps me awake at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know of anything offhand. I mean, this is a really new development where she's just changed all these rules. Ultimately, it's got to be decided by a court. If you get the right judge, you're in good shape. If you get an Obama judge, you're not.
This guy's had his hand up long, sorry.
Oh.
Aggressive effort to put a wedge between what could have been a better relationship between Russia and the U.S. initiated by Trump and Putin. And we have the people in the intelligence agencies that Obama brought in, a disproportionate number of whom are Muslim or Muslim friendly. We have the rise of ISIS and the support of the rise of ISIS. And under the Obama-Clinton regime. And now we have Trump putting boundaries on China. To what degree did China instigate conflict for Trump administration, putting a wedge between Russia and the U.S., healing that relationship?
Feel free to say, I don't know.
So what role did China play in all this?
Yeah, I don't think we really know that. I mean, so far, I haven't seen or heard of any precise evidence of China having anything to do with this part of it.
Next year, Chairman Xi wants to retake Taiwan by 2020 by peace if possible, by force if necessary. We have Trump arming Taiwan, putting boundaries on China as far as the trade, the trade deficits, and so on. So, and we have looked at some speeches by Bannon that who was, of course, instrumental in Trump's campaign, that China is the up-and-coming world power that considers the U.S. has-been world power.
Oh yeah, China's got, yeah.
What Trump wants to do is to put boundaries on China. So I'm wondering, certainly China knew this. So to what degree are they influencing friction for Trump?
Well, it's clear they want to be closer to Russia. They're trying to improve their relationship with Russia. Yeah, and anything they can do to cause us trouble, they'll be glad to do it. You know, they're stealing from us front and back, cyber and everything else. So, I mean, we have to be really thankful we have Trump willing to hit them upside the head with a 2x4 to get their attention. Yes?
Thoughts or comments on the recent murder of the 2 senators? Do you think they were getting too close or were too close?
There were 2 former Republican senators, state senators, killed recently. One found shot in the head and then wrapped in plastic outside her home. Yeah, I think it was in Arkansas. Yeah. The thing I heard that she was working on was getting close, I think it was, to a human trafficking operation.
Right.
And the human trafficking is the fastest growing, most hideous scourge of crime in the country. There was a arrest in this last week of 1,700 people related to child pornography and child predator rings that the FBI and the DOJ just pulled off this week, and mainstream media hasn't even publicized it. My first reaction to that was Anthony Weiner's laptop, because I mean, I'm serious. I mean, it was a trove of horrific information that literally made New York Police Department seasoned agents go in the next room and barf their guts out. It was so bad. Yeah. So yes, I mean, I would imagine that somebody took that and has been working on tracking down all of those, or at least as many of those people as they can find and prosecute. And thank God Barr and I mean, I just did a tweet today about it. This is what the FBI and DOJ are supposed to be doing. Thank you so much. Because that's what they are supposed to be doing. We have got to protect our own children. And I'm also on this rampage about the border. I mean, we have got to shut that border down. I don't mean close the border, I mean secure the border. And I've written a couple of articles about that too, because the president has the authority under 8 U.S.C. 1182F to simply stop all immigration for however long he wants to stop it. And I haven't been able to persuade him to do it. Probably a lot. I mean, if you think about the Mexican drug cartel and how many billions of dollars they make off human trafficking, and how they bought the last president of Mexico for $100 million, if you think some of our American politicians aren't getting some of that money, you know, I've got a house on the coast of North Carolina that was flooded by a hurricane. I'd love to sell you.
You know what? I want to say one thing. Why don't we take about 2 or 3 more questions? We have to be out of the room at 8:30. I want to be sure people have time to buy a book and have Sidney sign it. I think probably cash or checks are easier. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Is it $20?
$25 for the paperback and $45 for the hardback.
$25 for paperback, $45 for the hardback. Great gift for a young person who thinks everything is cool in the Department of Justice. Great gift for anybody.
Yes, sir.
Will we ever hear from the FISA judges, and do you expect there might be some individual like McCabe that will spill the beans on all the what's going on?
Yeah.
Will we ever hear from the FISA judges? My understanding is they've already been talking to the Inspector General. So hopefully they've given him an earful. Somebody needs to give them an earful for signing off on these warrants. I still see absolutely no excuse for that. None.
There'll be somebody that will have to be the squeak that talks about the whole situation.
Yeah, I don't know who I would expect the lawyers involved in all aspects of this to be the first to roll over.
When will the IG report be released?
The question was about the IG report. I heard that it's going to be delayed. I think they're having trouble getting some documents. I think there may be indictments, according to Mark Meadows, before there is an IG report. But it's going to be a doozy when it hits. I mean, the Hillary Clinton email one was 500 pages, and the one on the FISA abuse has got to be longer than that. Yes, sir.
And,
okay.
Good news is we have lots of room in Guantanamo for all
We have lots of room in Guantanamo for all those people. If they would only get sent there, that would be great. Yeah. Yes. Huber in Utah is the question. You know, I know Victoria Tenzing and Joe DeGenova, and he never interviewed their person. I haven't heard of anybody he's ever interviewed about anything. I don't know what, if anything, he's doing. If he's done it, it is the quietest investigation in the history of the country.
Last one. Last question.
The question is about the president pardoning Manafort, Stone, and Flynn. Manafort, the best thing to do there would be to commute his sentence. That gives him a little more protection from the prosecution in New York than a pardon would. There's a Supreme Court case pending that deals with simultaneous prosecutions or sequential prosecutions by state and federal, and hopefully that law is going to change. in some way, because right now, as long as it's a different jurisdiction and different offenses, which you can make by minor differences in how you apply the law, it's no problem to keep prosecuting somebody until they die. Yeah, so that's another thing that needs to be fixed. Stone, and Flynn, I really can't speak to those. Stone, I think, is probably not likely. There might be a time when the president considers it with respect to Flynn. I don't know.
You know, there could be tons of questions. My last thing I want to say is, when I came in tonight, a couple people asked me, I can't find your show anymore. It's not on Salem. It's not on Salem anymore. If you want information on how to hear my show, you can email me at americacanwetalk@gmail.com. It's on the flyers that are in the room. I'd be happy to tell you how to listen. You got to be able to watch on YouTube. And again, you're probably going to do this. Do you want to say thanks again to Sidney Powell?
Don't leave yet, we've got another announcement, but also thank you to Debbie Georgatos.
Yes.
This is Lane Sullivan, most of you know as president of the Park City Republican Women's Club.
Thank you, David and Sidney and Debbie. Oh, wow. Okay, is your blood boiling like mine is? Okay. I've got two announcements. Dallas County Council Republican Women are hosting an event on Thursday night with Steve Munisteri, who is the former Texas State Republican Party chair. He is going to talk about 2020 strategies to keep President Trump elected or reelected, and also John Cornyn. So it's strategies for keeping Texas red. And then the second thing I wanted to mention, so that is Thursday night at Herb's Coffee House. I know I didn't get that right, but anyway, that's what it is. It's on Dyer Street by SMU. Herb's House Coffee, that's what it is. It starts at 7. We have wine and snacks, and then the program will start with him at 7:30. I really encourage you to come. He is traveling all over the state doing these strategy sessions. Then Saturday morning at the Dallas County Republican headquarters, there will be training on voter registration. Now, every single person in this room needs to come to this and be trained to be a registrar. And I'll tell you what, we're targeting churches, synagogues, schools. We are getting everybody registered, because that's how we're going to take back this country, is to vote in the right people who have conscience and do the right thing. So anyway, David, thank you very much. And on behalf of Park City's Republican Women, thank you for letting us be a part of this tonight. And our friends at Dallas Eagle Forum, too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cindy. Also, one more thing. Last meeting, somebody left a sweater. Here it is. We'll be back here on July the 9th. Look forward to seeing you then. Again, thank you to Debbie and Sidney.